I'm Miwa Messer, and I'm with Barnes & Noble, and Gabrielle Zevin needs no introduction as far as I'm concerned. How many of you have already read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, right? Guess what? We're spoiler-free in this conversation because some people around you did not put up their hands, and I am not going to ruin this book for you because it is excellent, and I hope you have as much fun and get as much pleasure from reading this book as all of... A lot of B&N booksellers read this book because 2 years ago, it was our July 2022 B&N book club pick. So it had been a minute since I'd gone back to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
Did you read again?
I did.
Oh my God,
I did. Because you know what? I love this book and I love these characters.
I feel like this is the third conversation we've had together.
It is.
Which is, the rare thing is, because I've been promoting this book now since July of 2022, I'm the rare person that gets to sit with Miwa 3 times.
This is true. And also, honestly, the first time we taped, none of the reviews had come out. I think we taped in April of 22.
Au contraire.
Oh, no, wait, what did we have?
So there was one review that had come out, which was in the Harvard Crimson.
Oh, yeah, that one. Sorry.
So the Harvard Crimson reviewed the book for some reason.
Really early. No,
in about February.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
And she really didn't care for it.
Yeah.
And in fact, nothing after kind of like the age that I assumed that she was, nothing after age 20, she thought was relevant in the story. For her, it should have ended with Sam and Sadie making Ichigo. The end.
Right. So I'm looking around this room and I'm seeing folks who are maybe a little past 20. Right? Okay. I'll own it.
With each year, the book gets more entertaining.
But for me, that was really important, though, to have that span of time, right? And I love the metaphor of video games as sort of artifact and art and story. And I mean, I'm not a gamer, okay? I will own it, though there is now apparently Mario Kart in my apartment in Los Angeles, and I can't
How
explain.
did it get there?
James bought it for a thing. It just lives now. I've seen it, and I don't know how to play it. But what I love is how engaged I was. Like, I actually cared about the building of the engine, the game engine for Tomorrow. All of these things where I was like, wait a minute. Now I'm super invested.
I mean, but I think the secret of the book is that it's not about video games.
Correct.
And it's funny because every single place I have gone and, spoken about the book, and any time I've read, whether it's like a professional critic or just somebody online, at the beginning of every review, they decide that they have to state their exact relationship to video games. I have played no games in my life, like you just did.
Yep.
I have, I play all the games, and it's weird because I don't think that, say, if you're reading All the Light We Cannot See, that you're like, I was never a soldier, I was never in World War II,
Totally legit.
Right?
Totally legit.
But I think it's because people have feelings about video games.
I have so many feelings about so many things, and yes, video games, because I remember Pong. Okay, so Pong at one point was like high tech, okay? I am old enough to remember playing Pong and thinking it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And then I sort of got waylaid, and then my younger brother, had one of those handsets where if you wanted to dial onto a bulletin board, this is pre-AOL, you had to fit the phone into the handset so you could do the thing, and I would frequently maybe pick up the phone in the kitchen and derail some things, which I apologize profusely for. So, I mean, for me, it's also a matter of my relationship to tech. Like, I carry multiple phones. I spend a lot of time flying lovely places. Like, tech is a huge part of my life, and I don't really think about it.
No, and I think that was what was so great about video games as metaphor. In a way, like, we know that tech has changed us. We know that no one knows how to, like, go to a place without using their phone to get directions anymore.
Right.
And no one knows how to meet anyone unless they're doing it through an app.
Right.
Or even sometimes talk to anyone unless they're doing it through a text. We know that we have changed, but through video games, you can actually see a visual corollary to that change. So you have Pong, as you mentioned, the Mondrian-style minimalism of Pong, 2 lines, 2 dots, and then, to now, if you think of something like The Last of Us in 2012, Is that right? 2013.
Right.
You know, which has, you know, basically cinema style realism, you know, and, you know, but we can see again the corollary of the changes in our life that tech has wrought, you know. You only have to look at the character Mario,
Right.
you know, and you can see that he goes from being kind of this, you know, 8-bit figure to a 16-bit figure
Right.
to somebody who is like a 3D thing with hair, you know, and things like that as well.
So part of what I love about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is that it's really a novel about friendship, which we don't always get, right? Like, yes, there's a great love affair, but ultimately this is a novel about friendship.
Yeah.
But you've also described it as a novel about failure.
Yeah.
And I know your publisher said, please stop saying that, but I love the idea, though, when you see how this friendship evolves over 30 years, right? We'll use Sam and Sadie. There are other people who come in and out, but let's talk about that primary relationship for a second. You've got the evolution of their friendship, which really does, wow, it goes through some stuff. And yet, if it weren't for some of the failures, we wouldn't have a chance to see them sort of reboot and evolve, right? Like, you kind of need both.
Yes, I think so. You know, it's funny, the publisher didn't ask me to stop talking about failure. But at a certain point, you know, I was like begging people, I really want to talk about failure. No one in America ever talks about failure. And then everyone asked me about failure. And I was
This
like,
is what
please.
happens, right? When you're so early out of the gate and then you're catching up 2 years later.
Right. I was like, please, I never wish to talk about failure again.
Okay.
But seriously.
We can skip it.
No, I'm happy to talk
Okay.
about failure. No, I've reached peace with failure
Okay.
at this point. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of ethos that comes from playing video games. This idea that you can like keep trying and doing it, you know, over and over again until you kind of have this like perfect result, which is an ethos that I think Sam and Sadie bring to their lives and to their relationship. You know, that you can, if you can keep doing a do-over, you might reach something nearer to a perfection. You know.
But is that a function of their age, or is that a function of their lives as creatives?
I think both.
Okay.
You know, I think, you know, I was saying to somebody that it's not like I love failure, but I think I was so scared of failing when I first started as a writer, you know, and then my first novel came out and it, you know, failed. The only good thing that happened for it was it was in Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers.
We tried. We really, and I saw the final sales figure, and I'm pretty sure about 85% of that was us. So
yeah, probably more than that, you know. And I remember I did like one event for that book, and it was at a Barnes & Noble that was in, you know, New York City, and most of the people that had come that day had come for the air conditioning, you know. It could have been anyone, you know, but there was like one lady there that was, you know, the true fan, or the true reader, you know. That
store's a gym now.
I know.
The rent got really bad.
It was really weird because you would do your event at that store in front of a display of For Dummies books.
And the escalator landed right. Listen, real estate can be tricky sometimes.
It's tricky.
But, you know, I am going to ask you, based on our little exchange a second ago, so what's a question you wish people would ask but they never do? Since I've apparently asked all of the questions they ask all the time.
I think they've asked all. I think I've been asked every single question that it's possible to be asked. I'm thinking, is there any question really that I have not been asked at this point? You know.
Okay.
I mean, the questions that amuse me are when they're so like specific, you know, when there's so much about like a specific word choice or a specific moment, you know, and I'm surprised at somebody's take or read on it. So like one of the best interviews I did, other than with you, was with
not my publicist. Okay, let's just be clear.
was with Merriam-Webster.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the dictionary will interview you, and that makes you feel like maybe I chose some good words and that kind of thing.
That's really cool.
And it's called Word Choices is their program. But so I really enjoyed being asked, you know, like why that word versus another word, you know. And so something I wouldn't mind being asked is, I think, like, so I have noted that occasionally people complain about complicated vocabulary and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
Seriously?
They do, you know, and I think, you know, a thing to think about is that there is one school of thought maybe that text and novels and writing should be purely communicative, you know? And really, I think some of that comes from maybe a Hemingway-esque mode of thinking about writing and prose, you know? And I think that it's not always that the simplest word is the best word, you know? And also, it's funny to me, like how often people will use very complicated words to because the simple ones are hard to say, you know? So in a sense, this is a book about a guy who has trouble saying I love you, you know? And uses a lot of other complicated words and makes a lot of other complicated mechanics to manage to say those things instead.
So even though Sam's the guy who can't say I love you, we have readers who say, I love the character development of Sam and Sadie. Why did you decide to keep their relationship platonic?
Why did I decide to keep their relationship platonic? I don't know that I decided to keep their relationship platonic. You know, I think I will say about around the time I started writing this book, I published a modern love piece. It was called, I didn't give it the title, I should say that up front, but the title that the New York Times gave it was The Secret to Marriage is Never Getting Married. And if you claim to have the secret to anything, everyone on the internet will immediately hate you, you know? And so it was for me. But the piece was just about how I've been in a relationship for a long time and hadn't managed to marry, hadn't managed to get hitched. And I think, you know, when I think about it, there were all of these comments, and one of the comments was that I really couldn't understand anything about love, shouldn't be writing a modern love at all because I didn't have children, you know. And that made me quite sad because in a way you can't know why I don't have children, if I had fertility problems, if this was a huge loss in my life or something like that, you know. And but what the truth of it is, you know, I only have my life. It's the only life I'll know. And the kinds of love I've had in it, I am grateful for. And so in a sense, I think even back then I was aware of wanting to write something that talked about all the other kinds of love and relationships a person might have in their life. You know, because this is a story that I guess people call it a friendship story, and I certainly have. But it is just as much it's a marriage story, but it's about a work marriage. It's about two people that make things together. I don't know that they're terribly good friends, but what they are is really good collaborators, you know. And so that was what was important to me in it. You know, and it's amazing how many books really aren't about any other kind of relationship but romantic ones. You know, I think there are more now, but, you know, when I was actually asked to put together a list at one point for some reason, the endless list you were asked to put together for things. And there aren't a ton, believe it or not, of novels to love that are really about any other kinds of relationships other than a man and a woman pairing off, you know.
So if you have a chance, Alice Elliott Dark's Fellowship Point.
Yes.
Really,
that came out like the same week as Tomorrow,
Yes, because I had about 1,200 pages of reading and I interviewed you guys at roughly the same time. But again, like a friendship between these two women that runs basically their whole lives. So it's roughly 60, 65 years. And it's fantastic. So, I mean, if anyone is looking to add to their TBR after Tomorrow, just saying. And then also Sarah Thankum Matthews was a finalist for the National Book Award for her All of This Could Be Different. And for me, coming into it as a bookseller, like friendship isn't a thing that really did get written about a lot. And then work relationships, which I work a lot. I'll totally own it. I love that stuff. I love seeing how it plays out. And I love watching these characters grow and sort of pick at each other and figure out what they want, because I mean there's a big chunk of the book where they kind of don't know what they want, Sam and Sadie and Marks.
I mean, I think if you think of novel, what is a novel? You know, synonymous with novel is new, you know, and I think one of the obligations of the novelist is, you know, I had no goal to depict a platonic relationship, but that said, I want to depict the world as it is, not the world as one wishes it might be, you know.
Ambition, too, is a big piece of this. And, I mean, this was your 10th novel,
It is.
Wow, okay. So 10 novels in. But Sadie is coming up in the ranks when, you know, maybe women had not so easy go of things. You know, who are you trying to write a game? Who are you at MIT? Who are you in this room, right? STEM was not a phrase that got tossed around in the 90s, right? And so here she is making her way through the world. Sam is Sam, but he also does have physical limitations. And Marx is just bopping through the world because Marx. And we love watching Marx bop. But seeing the three of them, they all have ambition. They all want to be creatives. None of them is saying, I'm going to do this until I get a job in a bank. Right? Like, this is the thing that makes their heart swing. How much fun was that for you to write, but how complicated was that to write, and how much of that interacted and overlapped with your own feelings about what you had ambitions for in the book?
You know, I don't know if it's ever fun. Maybe I don't fully understand fun in that way, you know. Like, the way I understand novel writing is this kind of intense engagement.
Okay.
You know, I was watching, you know, during one of the summers when I was working on Tomorrow, there was like the Michael Jordan documentary that came out.
Oh, yeah.
And he talked about kind of flow and being in the zone and this kind of thing. And I can compare it a bit to that this feeling of intense engagement. But at a certain point, you know, you can have ambition that is directed outward, you know, where you're hoping for people to praise the things that you do. But a lot of my ambition has always been inward. You know, and I think that is something that is sustaining in a way that kind of looking for that outward validation, which of course I love outward validation. Who doesn't? You know, validate me, for God's sake, you know. Like, you know, when somebody, like when you have a sassy person at an office where you're meeting and they validate your parking and they're like, you're validated. I mean, I'm a little bit thrilled by that. You know, I feel like I'm craving this kind of thing. But, you know, I remember when I finished writing Tomorrow, I said to my partner, I don't really care what happens with this book, you know, because in a way I was pleased with it in a way that I hadn't felt. And, you know, that's easy to say 2 years later, a couple million copies later, you know, but I remember that moment feeling like, you know, that I was really satisfied with the work I had done. And so in the book, I talk about the long period of time when your taste and your ambitions do not align.
Right.
And Ira Glass has a similar riff that is much longer. But I did not know Ira Glass's riff. I know these things from experience because for a long time, I did not quite feel that I was writing books that I would love, you know, and which isn't to say I didn't put all of myself into them. There's no other solution to get to writing better books except to write the less good ones first, you know.
What kind of collaborative, creative projects have you made with people in your life that you cared about that might have influenced your writing about how these characters collaborated with each other?
You know, I have two answers to that, essentially. I work with a partner. We have made many things together. Some of them have done well and some of them have done less well. And I think, you know, and so just learning to work with one person really well is so amazing in a way because it makes it so you can work with many other people really well. And so in a sense, kind of the give and take and the respect I have with my partner from the movies and plays and things we've done together really served me well when I began writing novels, which is now 20 years ago. You know, like 20 years since, like 19 years since my first novel was published. And, you know, because I think people perceive that novel writing is solitary, and it is very solitary until the day it isn't. Right. And then there are so many people in the process. If it goes well, there are, you know. And so if you think of the character of Marx, in a way, it was an attempt for me to honor all the people whose names aren't on the front cover of a book, but that are really key in the process of making a thing, you know.
Out of all of the characters, who do you find yourself resonating with the most?
Well, I am... I guess to answer that question in a more holistic way, the way you write a character, and at first I don't know that my books were particularly richly characterized, and I think in a way that was because I didn't have myself figured out yet. You know, so to really write anyone else very well, you start with... you have to kind of acknowledge yourself at the center as the person who will write all of the other people. So in other words, you need to know what your privileges are, the things you are good at, the things you are weak at, and in order to kind of see anyone else, And so in a sense, every character I write is some amount close to me or some distance from me, but they are still from me,
Right.
And so, like Sadie, I think we share a lot of things about what it is to be a woman in the arts, and a lot of that came from, in fact, the first time I ever saw my novel in a store was at this very Barnes & Noble, and it was underneath a table with a sign that said women's fiction. This was 20 years ago. And until that time, I never knew that I had written women's fiction. I just thought I was writing fiction. But some of like Sadie's struggle with, again, how to present herself and to be just a creative person and to be taken seriously and to be seen, are things that come from me. Sam and I, we share an ethnic background. He's half Jewish and half Korean. And, at one point there's a scene in the novel where he goes to Koreatown for the first time. And I had that experience when I was older. I was already, I moved to LA for the second time about maybe 12 years ago now. And I remember going to Koreatown. It was the summer of Psy, so there was like the Gangnam Style poster. But I had never seen so many like Korean people and things in one place.
Right.
And it was really thrilling. And I had this sense that had I been raised in Koreatown, my novels would have been very different because I would have maybe been a Korean writer first, and I guess how much like ethnic identity is tied to location in a way, that the way you kind of see yourself is tied to where you find yourself in the world, and especially for biracial people. So a lot of, I think, Sam's struggle with being biracial are things that come from me. And of course, Mark's is not like me at all, and everybody tells me that that's their favorite character. But he's still like me because he has my extracurriculars in college, and he also, his mother has my mother's name. So there you go.
I just love the empathy that you have for all three of them. And I never felt like I had to choose one. Like, I was just kind of like, all right. And there were moments where I got, those of you with 20-year-olds in your life, all respect to the 20-year-olds in the room. There are times where you're just like, oh, yeah, I remember doing that. That was a bad idea then. And I'm very happy it's happening on the page and not to me. But I loved feeling that immersed in the story and watching all three of them figure out sort of what was going to happen and how the dots got connected, right? Like, that's the thing where, regardless of what field you're in, right, when you can connect the dots and suddenly you're like, oh, wait a minute, I just figured something out, right? And you didn't need someone standing in front of you at a chalkboard explaining it. You were just like, oh, I got a thing. And there were just so many moments like that throughout Tomorrow where we had the opportunity to, eavesdrop. What advice would you give writers aspiring to create characters with the level of depth and humanity that yours have in Tomorrow Times 3?
I think a lot of writers, and I won't mention any names, but a lot of writers, I think, write characters maybe that are to validate themselves in some way. They are trying to write people that rationalize their life choices through a character or a fictional form in some way. And I think as much as you can stop that, that is really useful for approaching character writing. For me, when I started writing Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, I wanted to, when I often read a novel where I feel like for the first 100 pages of it, it seems as if the author is getting to know the characters alongside as they write them. But I didn't want to do that with Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. So I wanted to know as much as I could about those people so that they were completely like alive from the moment you met them, that I wasn't writing somebody, like figuring them out, like, oh, really? He likes coconuts, on page 92, because there is, in a sense, you then become slave to this sort of the happenstance of what you might write, as opposed to thinking about, that from the moment a character steps into a novel, they should be fully formed in a way.
So you do a thing, and this is where we're going to talk around a thing, y'all. You switch voice.
I do.
One of the chapters, suddenly we're in the second person, which is impossibly intimate in a lot of ways. And it fits perfectly what's happening in the moment. But I want to talk about, and lots of questions with too much detail in them, respectfully. But I want to talk about the decision to switch. It feels very deliberate and very smart, but to go from sort of this, lovely meandering kind of voice to, oh, you're here.
Right.
In a totally different way. Can we talk about that for a sec?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that, and I think I can do it without spoiling it at all. If you look at the table of contents of the book, I feel like a college professor. Please turn to the table of contents. There are 10 sections of the book. People call them chapters, but in fact, they're not. The book has 10 sections, which each of the sections has multiple chapters. Look, some people are doing it. But if you look at the table of contents of the book, every single one except the section, the NPC, is a plural. So you have unfair games, you have sick kids, you have, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get to the NPC. And really, it's because every single other section of the book is about Sam and Sadie, except for this section, the NPC, which is about someone else.
Right.
And, I knew I was going to do that. I knew that I was going to write a character who would not live, because in a sense the book was so much about the difference between video game death and real death.
Right.
And so in a sense that was necessary to kind of draw this comparison. I didn't know who it would be or how that would play out until I got there, in a way.
Right.
But what I wanted the feeling to be was, I think it's amazing what switching between points of view can do, and so you're in kind of this close third that revolves, but that kind of alternates between Sam and Sadie, like for the whole book. And then when you get to this second person point of view, suddenly that is the most empathetic of all points of view, because it's saying you. It's so close. I'm speaking to you, the reader. And so when you use that, it is a choice, and I have done it before, and I have known that whenever you do anything formally odd, you are likely to lose people, so it really has to work. So I passed over that section more than probably any other section in the book, Also, another thing is that the earliest part of video games kind of is like interactive fiction. So if you think of games like Colossal Cave Adventure, which was one of the earliest video games, this is a text-based game where you are saying, like, you are standing in a cave, you see a jewel, you pick up the jewel. And so to be able to write a section that kind of imitated the earliest kind of video games was an interesting thing, and to try to make that extremely emotional for people, And, people... my British editor thought maybe I should cut it, but I was like, no, this will work,
Oh, it works.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. See? There we go. We all agree it worked.
And I love my British editor, and I welcome that kind of interrogation. I don't mind being confronted. I think there are some authors, maybe ones that aren't, 10 books in, that feel more confronted by editorial. But I prefer to kind of, again, really engage with feedback in that way, And so I felt strongly that would work. We all agreed that it worked in the end, and I think it worked.
Oh, it definitely did. So I'm going to switch gears for 2 seconds, because there's an audience question that I would like to know the answer to, but it's a character that... I'm not fond of. I understand his role in the story. I do not like this dude. I would be perfectly happy to punt him into the sun.
But Miwa, you like him a little bit, right?
I like him enough, because without him, some things would not have happened.
You like that you dislike him. Don't you think fiction needs villains to love?
All of those things, but I can still say it to you. Yeah, that guy. That guy. So we are going to get to that guy, because I do also think this is an important question to ask. What inspired Dove's character? He's toxic, tirelessly complex, and a cemented fixture in Sadie's life. So I was wondering if he was created to portray a certain stereotypical ideal in STEM/video game culture.
I mean, I don't think I am ever trying to create a character to portray a stereotype.
Yeah,
do you know?
Yeah.
So for me, I will say I loved writing Dove. That every time he came into the book, and when he first came into the book, it was always, I knew something interesting was about to happen.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, you welcome that sort of trickster character, I
Yeah.
guess, you know, that that feels a little unruly and out of control. Like, I like when I'm writing a character and I feel uncomfortable with some of the things that are happening
Oh yeah,
here.
he was that guy.
Yeah, you know, so he is that guy, you know, but the thing that fascinates me most, and the thing I find most interesting in fiction and in other forms of entertainment, is what fiction can do with time. So, you know, so like time, there's the time it takes you to read a novel, you know, and so that's the time that you live in. But then in that same amount of time, years can have passed.
Yeah.
And so the kind of way we resolve these two amounts of time is, to me, the most interesting thing about fiction. So in writing a book that took place over 30 years, and I'm getting around to Dove, what fascinated me about somebody like Dove was that he was the kind of person who would have been perfectly fine up until about 2017 when Me Too happened.
Yep.
You know, and so people will sometimes ask me, why isn't Dove punished? I'm like, it's not 2017 yet. You know, he was good. As long as he kept a certain amount tidy, he would have been more or less okay. And so the kind of way we feel about a certain kind of character, a certain kind of situation, or a certain kind of thing in different eras is, you know, is something that I find endlessly fascinating.
He was also considered brilliant.
Yeah,
and
he's
that,
brilliant.
That
yeah.
label protects you to a certain extent. If you were
especially in the 90s,
right?
you know, yeah.
Were there any parts of the story you struggled with writing? Did you have to rewrite to change any?
You know, the two parts of the book I went over the most were the NPC and pioneers.
Yeah.
You know, and in a way, the thing about writing many, many novels is I have a sense of all the objections people will have before they have them. You know, I'm so experienced in that way. And so I knew that I would be asking people a lot to go into the pioneer section and to switch to a second person section. So I wouldn't say I struggled with them. I just knew that they needed to be perfect, and that even if they were perfect for some people, they wouldn't work. You know, the more you kind of write novels, the more you realize that there are some novels that their only goal is to make you turn those pages as fast as possible. But that doesn't have to be your only goal in writing a novel. A novel can also slow the pace, can get quiet, can suck out all the sound. Like, you know, with the NPC section, to return to that for a section, I wanted it to have that feeling of when you go into like a recording studio and there's no sound and you're completely alone and you can hear your voice so clearly. You know, and so for me, I wouldn't say I struggled, but I enjoy the struggle. You know, like I want to fight with the text a bit.
You like the puzzle part.
I do like the puzzle part.
Okay.
You know, I do think that, you know, I've been asked endless variations on how is novel writing like video games, you know, and I don't think it is in many ways, you know, but one way I think I'm sort of indefatigable about wanting to solve the thing,
Right.
you know, that I'm not satisfied until I feel that I have solved it.
And I realize they're not entirely the same, but I do think storytelling runs through novels, film, video games as they exist now, right? Like, I mean, especially if you look at something like The Last of Us, which is a very sort of complex story. So how do you see the future of storytelling evolving, especially with the rise of interactive media and video games?
You know, it's funny because the way I saw Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow was that it was going to be about something fairly newfangled, which was video games, but that the storytelling itself I wanted to be old-fashioned.
Yeah.
You know, and to have the feel or the sweep of a classic novel, you know, that you have characters and I actually wanted to say this before when we were talking about ambition, and I'm just going to return to it very quickly. Just to say that, you know, so much of Mark's Sadie and Sam is about money. You know, Sadie is kind of upper middle class, and, you know, Sam is lower middle class, and Mark's is rich. And a lot of this determines the kind of art you get to make at any given point in time, you know. And I think, you know, it's important in kind of talking about art and what people get to make to kind of factor the fact that money is at play.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, without a doubt.
Because I saw the book as about, again, the fact that they are participating in a capitalist system, you know. They need to make things that people are going to wish to play, you know. And in a sense, that was something I wanted to write about. But what was the question at hand?
Oh, sorry.
You already put it in the pile.
But we can pull it
We
out.
can pull it right back out.
It right back out. How do you see the
Oh,
future
right.
of storytelling evolving, especially with the rise of interactive media and video games?
You know, I think there is a generation of people like myself that, so the first generation of people to play video games as children were born in the 1970s and early 1980s. People called them the Oregon Trail generation. Actually, I did a big event in Oregon and I learned that it's Oregon. I've been saying it wrong for my whole life.
You know, I occasionally get notes from people about my pronunciation, and I'm so sorry. I try to keep the Boston out, and it just sometimes it slides right in.
It was a great event. It was the Portland Reads event, you
Okay.
know. So, you know, I started the event by asking them, do you know what happens when you get to Portland, to Oregon? And they were like getting nervous. Some people said dysentery. You know, I heard somebody scream. But I said, you win the game. You know, it's the only time I got to say something like that. But, but yeah, I don't fundamentally think that, other than the fact that, you know, I don't think I personally would have written Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow had I not played video games my whole life. So my dad is a computer programmer. My dad's right there.
Oh, hi, Dad.
Raise your hand, Dad.
Hi, it's really nice to see you. Thanks for coming.
And that's my mom, too.
Hi, Mom.
But my dad is a computer programmer, and I think I had computers in my house from a young age, and I was aware that computers weren't an incredibly foreign thing. So once I think I had an understanding early on that the job of a programmer was to learn languages,
Yeah.
you know, and that in a sense learning a computer programming language was not unlike learning French or something like that.
Actually, and music.
It is a
the
way
three
to
of them are
communicate
totally-
something to someone.
Yep.
And that is what you have with, you know, what Sam does. It's a way that they're trying to communicate things to each other, you know. But so I don't think that the storytelling will essentially change. But I do think maybe our interests will change and the way we approach that storytelling will change.
I mean, for me, language is most interesting when it evolves, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
and where we go as people, right? And where we end up, it's like, well, I like it when stuff changes, but I seem to not necessarily be in the majority on that. I'm going to combine a bunch of questions because we have lots of folks who want to get their books signed, and then we have a lot of craft questions. So I'm not going to treat this like a speed round, but we are going to get crafty for a second here.
Because I'm really not speed round people.
No.
Yeah.
And we are not
I'm
rushing,
like-
but I want to be mindful of the fact that I would like everyone to get their books signed too. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is an incredible book. Okay, before we get to craft, one more. Were any other authors or books influential in writing it?
I mean, all of them. You know, I think in a way, the only two things you can really have for writing advice is to read a lot and write a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and so I don't know, again, that there was one book that I was like, I wish to emulate this book. You know, maybe something like The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay.
Right.
You know, because in a way that book was generational in that it was able to take this subject of, you know, comic books and make that something elevated and serious. So maybe, although I don't think the books are really very similar in a way, but something like that, or some of the books that were more, you know, a book I love is Then We Came to the End, and Then We Came to the End by Joshua Ferris,
Yeah.
which is a book that explores work, I think, in a really serious and interesting way. But, you know, I don't know that there weren't any books that I found or came across that were exactly like, so, you know, that were things I could follow in that way. You know, I admire something like when a novelist can really take a subject that does not ostensibly seem interesting and make us deeply care about it. I feel like this is, you know, close to something I wish to do, you know.
So what's your daily writing process? Do you write every day for a set time limit or a word count?
Neither one.
Okay.
You know, I find it difficult to promote books and write them, you know, and so I've kind of been promoting this book for the last couple of years, and it seems like, again, the introvert who writes the books and the extrovert who promotes them have almost nothing to do with each other, you know. The extrovert is like a rodeo clown, and the introvert is like, why are you making up all these stories about what we did, you know? And, So I don't necessarily feel like, again, that I have had time really to write in a serious way. So I have been researching a book for a while, and I've gotten significantly along that way. But I haven't been alone enough to feel like that I have a complete handle on it. I wrote a lot of this book during 2020. I started writing the book in 2018. And I quit writing it several times, which you should want to do with any book you are writing, you know. And but when 2020 hit, we didn't really know. It's this huge trauma that happened to all of us that is largely unprocessed. That time the whole world shut down and we all just kind of went into our houses. It's this thing that happened to everyone. Yeah. But for me, it was obviously horrible time to be a person in the world, but it was kind of a good time to be a writer, maybe, And I just remember thinking that if there's no publishing and there's nobody writes any more books and I never publish another book again, I just want to figure out how to get these two kids off this subway platform. I just want to solve this story, And so I had a particular useful solitude during that time that allowed me to get this book written.
I love the title Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and as you can tell I do too, which is why I keep saying it, because I can. Could you speak about your creative process coming up with titles for your creative projects? Does it arrive at the beginning, middle, end, or is it different every time?
It's different every time. I would say I love to have, when I start writing a book, a title and a sense of the ending. But with Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, I had neither a title nor a sense of the ending, But it's something I will, worry over until I get to the place where I am going to title and have a sense of that ending. But I keep kind of going over the ending the whole time I'm writing the book. And I think the reason I like to know an ending is because you want to have some sense that you might land this plane.
Okay.
Even though rarely, it doesn't actually have to be that ending. I just want to know that there's some plan in place that maybe we could get to and then you can do something else. But with regard to titles, no, I didn't have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow at the beginning, Obviously, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow comes from one of the bleakest lines in all of Shakespeare. The bleakest soliloquies in all of Shakespeare, I should say. It's probably one of the first bits of Shakespeare I ever committed to memory. And, obviously it's Act 5 of Macbeth, and nothing good happens in Act 5 of Macbeth. Sorry if that's a spoiler, but...
I hope not at this point, but...
Right. So nothing goes well for anyone in Act. Maybe some people, but none of our main characters does anything go well for in Act 5 of Macbeth. And so for me, what was interesting was that the character who invokes it in my novel, who is Marx, he finds great hope in it. Of course, he's in a salesman mode, so it's hard to know if he truly believes what he's saying. The idea that, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, that within it there are kind of is a metaphor for video games with their infinite restarts and infinite chances at redemption,
And speaking of restarts, there's a film version of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow coming that you were writing the screenplay for.
I was player one on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you still had a draft.
Yeah.
So what was the process like of converting the book to the screen?
When I sold the book to movies, the one thing I told my film rights agent was that I really think this should be a limited series. So, of course, it sold to motion pictures. But I was compelled to, because I love going to the movies. I love that experience of just being immersed in something and not being able to look away from it. The actual even theatrical Grove-type movie-going experience, so the experience of that was, creative in a way, in that I think, but the book didn't necessarily, I think, it didn't easily want to be a screenplay. I think screenplays, we know they're 3 acts, everything is external. This is a book that has a lot of internal things happening. I think screenplays tend to be a lot of kissing and fighting and kissing and fighting,
you have to strip a lot of the interiority out, right?
And this is a book that is kind of very largely about its interiority.
Yeah.
So I think, for me, I was certainly game to trying lots of things with it. But I think, again, I'm not sure that it easily bent itself to being a screenplay.
That's fair. Speaking of landing planes, and this is the last question because I really do want to get you guys into the signing line so you can speak to Gabrielle directly. What prompted you to have that scene in the airport at the end? I'm not spoiling anything because I'm not telling you anything beyond that. Instead of picking a location that we'd been at before.
I mean, I hope this isn't a spoiler to kind of talk about the book in this way, but, you know, in a way, what happens in the book is that the last scene of the book is identical to the first scene in the book, only different details that have changed, their ages, you know, where they are in their lives, and the kind of transportation venue they find themselves in. And so, in a sense, I hope people read that last scene and they feel all the resonances, almost a deja vu feeling of where they have been before, because, you know, within that was sort of a metaphor for video games. It is the restart that is at the end of the book.
I promise that was not actually a spoiler. More importantly, I'm so happy I got to see you, but, you know, we should do the other part of the thing.
Got to do the other part
We got to do the
thing.
other part. So thank you all for being here tonight. Gabrielle Zevin, tomorrow is out in paperback. Thank you so much for joining us.